Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This time we will be having a look at the lists to be played at the Gold Edition 2023 for Bloodstorm, which is a tournament which is going to be held in Eindhoven, the Netherlands. And it's going to be next weekend, so everybody's really excited to get into the games. The point system is a little bit different than the scoring system as well. So here basically this is the overview of how you're allowed to construct your armies. You're allowed to bring one army. This sometimes varies, so it's good to specify. Your army points up to a maximum of 3,500 points per army list. It's a format that, besides ETC games basically here in the Netherlands, is also quite popular with tournaments. You build it according to the rules, and then the supported armies are all the armies, including the supplement armies. However, the giant supplement is not allowed because it's a bit outdated by now. Then there's going to be some different scenarios. So we have this one where you have some type of deployment, but you also have Taskmaster, which is to steal their land. So you have to have at least one scoring unit inside the enemy deployment zone at the start of the first 4 player turns. You have to use a scoring or choose a scoring unit in your army, and it must be alive at the end of the game. And mutiny, your general must have been removed as a casualty. So this type of scenarios put really a different type of pressure on your army list building, with some aspects that can be really good and some aspects that can be a bit worse. Like removing your general. If it's a 1,000 point model, then it's going to be one first point is that it's going to be more tricky, and the other point is going to be that you will lose a lot of points if you will lose that general. Otherwise, we have some victory point different objective points. For the other ones, we have, well, basically similar scenarios. So you have to choose an enemy scoring, that one has to be removed. One of your scoring units must successfully charge an enemy unit in the rear facing. That's going to be a really difficult one to pull off. And then you have to be inside the enemy's deployment zone with a character at the start of one of your player turns during game turn 4 or later. Then we still have the last one. One of your scoring units must die, basically. You have to score a terrain feature, and the enemy general must be removed. So these are all the ways in which you can get some extra points in the event. And if you look at the victory points, also, for example, here you have to have a difference of more than, I would say, 1,500 points difference at least to make a bit of scoring there. So managing like one task and losing by 1,500 or more points still will net you a 4-3 if your opponent doesn't make any of the tasks. So these tasks are quite important indeed. Then we will have a look at the armies. This is going to be quite an extensive list because there's 40 players, so I will try to limit the time to quite low amounts of time per army, just to make it a bit of a speedy video still. We first have an army breakdown of the different armies that are there. There's not going to be any cultists, there's not going to be any hobgoblins, any legions of sin, or any kingdom of Aquitaine or Vermin's Wall. So the first 3 are supplement army books, and the others, I don't know specifically why, but all around the board, otherwise it's quite an even spread. However, the Orcs and Goblins stand out with 7 armies, and Warriors of the Dark Gods are going to be 5 of them. Warriors is always quite popular. Orcs is, well, a bit of a staple, obviously. So yeah, we'll see what that brings. First army is going to be Alex with Sylvan Elves. He has a Prince on a Dragon, which is quite... we talked about this with losing your general, and this is going to be quite a crippling model to lose. Otherwise, I find that the list is quite well rounded with a lot of different options. So you have some magic, you have some shooting, so some close combat threats. It leans a little bit towards having to deal your damage with shooting with the Sylvan Archers and the Pathfinders, and only minor combat aspects. However, still you have a dragon at 3,500 points, which can be a threat for some opponents that are going to be quite difficult to deal with. So I think it's a nice list, not really over the top in any way, and I wish him the best of luck. We have Alma with Undying Dynasties. So these are the skeletons and the mummies and pharaohs and stuff like that. This one also has quite some magic There's a Wizard Master and there's a Wizard Adept, so that is quite loaded on magic for 3,500 points. However, Undying Dynasties also likes to bring its magic. Skeleton Chariots are quite a staple in the army, and I think it's always quite a decent choice. So one unit, if I understand correctly, is going to be light troops, and the other one is going to be scoring, but not light troops. Banner of the Entombed with scoring is quite interesting, because then you can just pop up your scoring anywhere on the table, and then there's going to be one turn at some point where you don't count as scoring anymore, I believe, if you arrive very late. But having this very mobile scoring in that sense with these scenarios is going to be quite useful indeed. 13 Acropolis Guard with full magic support is nothing to sniff at. And then still the Tomb Cataphracts, they also have the special ambush, so they can also even still pop up somewhere. I think scoring wise it's going to be quite a good list. Losing your general is not that big of an issue anymore. So this might be actually quite a good list to bring to the event. We have Iron with Sylvan Elves. He also has a Forest Prince on a dragon, so apparently for Sylvan Elves this is the staple to run. He also has some wizards, mostly basically the Wizard Master on Druidism. Also with the Bow of Wiskin, we saw that in the other list, I didn't really mention it, but this is basically a bolt thrower that can shoot in addition to all of the other shooting that you have. I don't know what the aim skill of a druid is. Forest Prince nearly always hits, so that's going to be quite a pain, I would say. But then again, the bow on the druid also just supports your shooting quite decently. In this list we have a big unit of Kestrel Knights with the 5 of them, and otherwise the list is quite similar to the other one. So I would say, well, it's pretty balanced, pretty neat, and it can also do quite well. I don't think the Kestrel Knights are scoring though, but I would have to check that. Otherwise the scoring is a little bit less mobile in the list. We have me with the Dread Elves, so I know the list that I'm playing. Honestly, it's I've been practicing for the ETC for quite some time now. I tried not to bring my ETC list, but still bring a list that I can learn a bit from for the ETC. So I didn't use any Dread Knights before. I'm going to use them now to just see how they do. And otherwise, it's basically, it's going to be quite a successful list in general matchups, I think. So yeah, if you have any questions about my list, please ask them in person or online. I'll be willing to answer any questions. We have Boss with Goblins. So he just completely scrapped the orcs from the book. So currently in the book, we're still playing with the, let's call it the old book. The release of the new book was just 2 days ago or something. So that's a bit too recent to get them in for a tournament. It's one of these lists with a lot of cave goblins and a lot of supporting tools for cave goblins. Discipline might be an issue at some point, however the king still has discipline 8 or 9, I think. So it might not even be that much of a difference. However, in the event your character, your general, is going to have to die in some battle. So that is going to be an interesting game for all these goblins. On the other hand, there's a lot of stuff in the army that is also fearless, so it doesn't really matter. But then again, we will see what happens with all this crazy nonsense. We have Brom with the Warriors of the Dark Gods. Brom is also one of the people who is not deterred by the fact that his general might have to die in one scenario. On the other hand, it's going to be quite challenging in the other scenario where you have to kill your opponent's general to get your general killed. So that is the upside, I guess. But it's mostly an upside for other players that you are bringing such a hard model for people to get down. So what does he have effectively? He has a Chosen Lord on a Wasteland Dragon. I find it quite intriguing to see, or quite novel to see Luck of the Dark Gods on a Wasteland Dragon. I think it works. You get a 6-up Aegis on your dragon, so that is quite nice. Is it worth it? It depends. If you can glance off a lucky bolt thrower hit from your dragon, then it probably is worth it. Otherwise, we have a block of barbarians, we have a block of warriors. Barbarians are ever so cheap because, well, a lot of players don't really regard them as a very meaty combat unit. However, 20 barbarians with paired weapons, with throwing weapons, with a barbarian chief, with all kinds of stuff himself, they still do dish out quite some damage, so it could actually work quite fine. The Forsworn unit with Domination, I really like it, especially if you give them an upgrade that increases their armor penetration. These are the guys that stick on the board that, well, they have resilience 4, they have a 3 of armor save. They stick around quite nicely normally. And then with the Damnation, it means that if they were to break at some point, they turn into the Wretched ones. And they will never go away from where they are. So it's basically a scoring block that at some point can lose scoring. Yeah, I think it's a decent list. I'm wondering where the Battle Shrine goes, if it goes into the Barbarians or the Warriors. And generally, I didn't mention it yet, but I believe the list has a bit of a sloth theme because every single upgrade that you can take in terms of marks has been chosen to be sloth in this list. So that's some extra bonus points for style there. We go to Calvin. Calvin is also bringing Warriors of the Dark Gods. He has an Exalted Herald, which is usually quite a strong piece at these point levels. Calvin was a bit smart here in making a Sorcerer the general instead of the Exalted Herald, meaning that it's easier to cope with the fact that you have to lose your general in one of the games. And then otherwise, he has Warriors, he has Fallen, he has 2 units of Chosen Knights, and that is basically the bulk of the meat of the list, I mean. So these Chosen Knights with Envy, they get to combat faster with an extra instance of maximized rolls for charges, most notably. Stalker Standard works quite well on Chosen Knights because you don't have to deal with all this terrain. And together with the Wasteland Torch, his army is basically immune to terrain in general. So yeah, these Sylvan Elves that make you take dangerous terrain tests, he basically ignores it, and that is quite a virtue to have. I think the Exalted Herald will shine quite nicely at these point levels, and we will see how the rest will do. We also have Daniel. Daniel is bringing Warriors as well. So there's quite some Warriors at the event, as we saw earlier. We are about halfway through all the Warriors list now. This guy is bringing a Feldrak Ancestor. Feldrak's Ancestors are quite meaty pieces to have on the table at this size of the game. In addition, he's also bringing a Wasteland Beam of Sorcerer, he's also bringing a Forsaken one, and he's bringing a Marauding Giant. So if you have something to remove big single models, like an Empire Cannon with an Artificer, then you're going to be loving this matchup. Otherwise, maybe not so much. On the other hand, Panic can still sometimes be a bit of an issue. However, the Feldrak Ancestor ignores it for the non-Feldrak family models. Forsaken one ignores it completely. The Marauding Giant doesn't ignore it, and the Wasteland Behemoth doesn't either. So if you can make either of these models Panic off the table, that would be obviously quite good. Also, I love the fact that he is playing a single Wretched one. I have done this with Warriors in the past. For me, it worked like a charm, just because the investment that you make is meaningless compared to the effort that your opponent has to make to deal with it. Then he has a bit of a smart choice with the Banner of the Relentless Company on the Barbarians for some very mobile scoring. On the other hand, the Feldraks also have the Banner of Speed, so it might actually be that this list is way more mobile than some people anticipate. One thing to look out for is that the Banner of the Relentless Company does not work, however, if the Marauding Giant is in the unit of Barbarians, I believe, because he's not standard size infantry, and I thought that was the limitation. Maybe it's only infantry and then it would work, but I would have to check that. Then we go to Daniel Scheper with Dread Elves. So Daniel is bringing quite a lot of Dread Elves, to be honest. So he has a big block of Temple Militants, he has a big block of Selection Spears, and then basically some MSU type units. I don't know if I would call this an MSU list per se. 23 Temple Militants, probably going to be played 6x4. I don't remember if they still have fight and extra rank or if they just got 2 attacks. I think they just got 2 attacks each. So then that would still net you 6 white, 18 attacks from the unit. It's quite a hefty amount if you consider that they also have the Blades of Direct, so their strength goes up if you have a buff on them. And the Temple Exarch on Alchemy can give them Glory of Gold or the Word of Iron. Word of Iron is kind of meaningless on Temple Militants in general. So I would have liked to get some extra spells in there. Luckily, Daniel also thought about that. And he brought some Warlock Acolytes with a champion. So this champion can also cast some magic like Perception of Strength or some other magic buffs to boost his units. I think it's a nice list. It's going to lose quite some points due to the MSU style of the list. That is just how that type of army works, I think. But with this event, that doesn't really matter. So it might actually be quite successful. We have Danny with Saurian Ancients. So Danny is bringing quite a list of models. So he has an Alpha Carnot. He has a lot of different models that I think he just likes to put on the table. Like for example, an Alpha Carnosaur is a cool model to put on the table. He has the very useful Dusk Forged Cowboy. I believe that no matter what army you play, this type of build is always useful. Like one rerollable guy that can just stick around. It's always a nuisance for your opponent. Then a big block of Tech Warriors. They're definitely going to dish out some damage. Then we have the Skink Warriors. I'm not that versed in Saurian Ancients, but I believe this is quite a witty list with all kinds of different combinations in there that make it into quite an effective list. The Titanopod is something that people will have to look out for, especially if you're not used to it, because it just stomps everything to the ground. I believe the weakness that I found so far is that it's only advanced 4. So if as an opponent you try to make it not charge anything, you will be quite successful at doing so. Now we have Eric with Saurians. Eric just said, well, I'm not gonna play around with all these little small units and stuff. I'm just gonna put some bigger units on the table. So these Tyroscutus herds, I believe they're gonna go in the units of Tegu Warriors and the Skink Warriors for making some massive units. So the Skink Warrior unit of 35 with Tyroscutus actually has a footprint of like 50 models. And then the Venomous Fortress adds some extra poison attacks, I believe, to the unit. And then the Carnosaur can also go into the Raptor Riders. So basically he has 4 units of decent size combat blocks. And then he has the Skink Gorillas to support all of this and chaff up the enemy lines when needed. And he doesn't have any magic, or at least not that I can discover. Maybe it's hidden somewhere in the list. You never know with these Saurian Ancients. But we will have to look for that. I think it's a nice list. It's quite a mass of bodies, and I wonder what people will do to this. We have Flores with Demon Legions. I think this list has the favorite character build that I've found so far. And that's actually the first build here on the list. It's the Kalima's Deceiver with Iron Husk, Chitinous Scales, Venom Sacs, and Fly. So every Kalima's Deceiver that I have encountered personally so far has not had the upgrade of Fly. But when looking at the profile, I was like, okay, you have 4 hit points, you're gonna have Resilience 6 because of Iron Husk, and you have a 4-up Aegis save. Whilst you have offensive 8, I believe, defensive 6, and you get the amount of attacks that enemies have in base contact of you. So in the end, you're not gonna lose combat by that much against most units. It's gonna be quite rare for you to lose combat if the opponent doesn't have any combat res. And then you combine it with the rest of the list with a lot of unnatural roots in there. So combat resolution wise, this list is going to be quite stable, I find. And then you just fill it up with some shooting stuff, some combat stuff. I think it's really, it's a list that could be very effective. However, it's a demons list. Demons have always had the issue of having to just pair their matchups quite carefully because otherwise you will suffer from not optimizing your list to the fullest extent. So Flores, well done. I think it's a very witty list, and I would be very interested to play against it at the tournament. Kevin has orcs, so he has no goblins. So yeah, this is just a meaty orc list with a lot of orcs, a big block of handbashers, big block of orcs with bows, big block of iron orcs, some cavalry to support, and then some chariots. Personally, I've also run this type of list once, and it worked. It just works. Iron orcs just dish out the damage that you need. Other orcs just do orc stuff, and it just works. It's just quality troops basically, and it's too much for your opponent to handle in some cases, and the Warg really helps. Wizard Master on Shamanism, there to support the army with either +1 resilience or +1 strength on the unit, mostly, and to control the movement of your opponent a little bit with Break the Spirit. Yeah, this just works. It's gonna be a nice beer and pretzel style army, because it will play quite quickly, quite relaxed, and you'll have enjoyable games. And I like this list. Harm brings Empire of Sun style. So Harm is one of the people that's also in the ETC team together with me, and yeah, this is one of the types of list, archetypes of list, I should say, that we have been trying around. So last year I went to the ETC with Empire of Sun style with a lot of Knights of the Sun Griffins. Harm is still taking the grips of the army, and he just really wanted to get a little bit of extra practice in. However, he also wanted to try to make people have a bit of a fun experience. So this is the end result. I think in a general fun tournament that is just focused on scoring points, this is going to be quite a hard list to bring. However, with the scenarios that we have currently, I think it could be okay. I mean, Knight Commander has to die in one of the games, which is quite crippling to the army, and also sometimes a bit of a challenge with the protective gear that he has, and also the Light of Sun style. And also, otherwise, the objectives just score so highly that it just balances out basically the general strength that I find that this army has. Then we have Jan with the Asklanders. So this is one of the supplement armies that is coming to the event. I think there's not that many of them. So yeah, Asklanders. I think personally that if you bring Asklanders, you should put in some ambushing stuff, because otherwise you might as well bring warriors. And I think he has it with the longship raid on the Asklander chief. I generally like lists that Jan makes, because they're not over the top in any way, and he still manages to play quite well with them generally. So he still manages to achieve some results that can be surprising sometimes. So in this case, there's an Asklander chief with the longship raid. Is probably gonna ambush with either the 26 Asklanders or the 20 Asklanders. I think it's gonna be the one with the throwing weapons. Ice trolls generally are good with ignore flaming attacks, I believe, so they are quite steady. And then, yeah, it's just a nice mix of the different units that Asklanders has, and it's a nice mix of just being a balanced army. I think it's a cool list. We have Jeroen with Empire of Sun style. So Jeroen is bringing infantry list, I could say, because basically 99% of his models are infantry models. So this is a more traditional Empire of Sun style list with a big block of heavy infantry, some support units, and then a big block of Imperial Guard. I have played around with Empire infantry myself. It's difficult to master. It's easy to just put on the table and see what it does. So I hope that Jeroen has some experience with Empire, because then it gives quite interesting games, I would say. I think there's quite a steep learning curve to playing it successfully, and I think also that the power creep in 9th Age has not been that kind to bog standard Empire infantry. However, I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that will be able to break through the 40 Imperial Guard that he's bringing. And yeah, that's just life. So yeah, it's a solid setup with the general with Imperial Seal, so you have the discipline everywhere that you need. Death Warrant on Imperial Guard with great weapons, so you have battle focus. A prelate in there, so you get also the hatred, and then just a battle standard bearer with double legion standard. Probably they're gonna be spread out over the heavy infantry and the Imperial Guard, but then you only need like 2 characters basically to ramp up the damage potential of either of these units. And the cannon is really welcome in a lot of matchups in this event. Then we have Arun Tay. He's bringing orcs and goblins. He is the only player so far who's bringing orcs and goblins. So yeah, he's trying to make the maximum of both archetypes of the list. I like the Banners of Discipline on the core units because, well, it just sucks if you fail your panic test and your unit is gone. And honestly, this type of list is one of the most discipline reliable ones that you can build. If you put your BSB in one of the units, I think I'm just looking for a BSB somewhere. I don't think he has a BSB, so the 15 Iron Orcs are just gonna be running around on their own. Oh, I found a BSB. It's Goblin Chief. So a Goblin Chief usually goes in the Goblins. So this unit will automatically pass its panic tests. And then you have the Orc and Bashers. BSB is... I don't know what the consensus is of Orcs and Goblins player. Whether a BSB and a Banner of Discipline and Common Orc and Bashers is better, or whether the Feral Orc variant is better. I think I would prefer the Common Orc ones because you have more control over where they can charge, when they can charge. Yeah, and then the rest of the list basically just rounds out the list with not going over the top with like 4 Scourers and 3 Splatterers and everything. Just having a single Git Launcher, a single Splatterer, and a single Giant. I think this is nicely constrained, and I think it's a cool army. I wish you all the best. Then we have Johan. Johan is bringing beast herds as ever. So basically, he's one of our few local beast herd players, but he's always really true to the cause. I have seen his army before. It looks marvelous, and it's always composed of more or less the same units. So yeah, Beast Lord on a Razor Test Chariot. It's just a decent choice. Minotaur Chieftain, I think you have to bring one if you play Beast Heads, just because the Great Totem Bear is quite okay. Then the Wizard Adept on Avocation, just to boost your magic a little bit, because, well, if you only bring bound spells, then usually you don't really get any spells through, so this is a good setup. And then basically the rest of the list nearly writes itself, I would say. Jabberwock is, I always try to think that it's really amazing at these point levels, and then I realize how much fearless stuff there is in the game and how many ways to mitigate panic effects like Banners of Discipline. So I don't know how effective Jabberwocks currently are. However, if you take one, you should pair it with Avocation, and that is what Johan did. So that's good. Then we have Jordi with Vampire Covenant. I believe Jordi plays this with Empire of Sun style models, but I'm not sure. Like Zombie Pirate, I believe it's Jordi. So he has a vampire count on occultism with Lamia and Commandment. On foot, I think he's gonna go in one of the skeleton locks. And then a vampire crochet with shamanism with the BSB with hypnotic pendant. He's really buffing up these guys. So the hypnotic pendant gives you parry, so it makes sense that both of the skeleton units have actually halberds and spears. I don't know if you get a lot of mileage out of buffing up your skeletons. However, I could be wrong. Because in the end, if you look at it, you still end up with offensive, defensive 6. skeleton. So one of the core shades likely is going to go in one unit, and the count is going to go in the other unit, because otherwise commandment and hypnotic pendant don't really combine as well. So one unit is going to be offensive, defensive 6 halberd, and the other is going to be spear with parry, something like that. And then you have the potential to raise your skeletons and also up their combat potential by using your buff spells. Zombies just for scoring. I think it's good to bring 3 units of zombies in this type of event, because scoring is quite needed. And it can also be like one of the units that you have to have die. So in that sense, it's good to bring triple zombies. 2 units of chaff, bat swarms, a court, and then 2 units of vampire knights for this fast scoring. Could work surprisingly well, honestly. I don't know if I should expect a lot from it, but it could be surprising at the event. Joris is bringing orcs and goblins. So Joris is a big fanboy of feral orcs, and he has his big block of feral orcs. Joris also brings wrecking teams. So I'm warning you, Joris, please make sure that you don't run over your own wrecking teams, because it kind of destroys feral orcs. Yeah, so it's a cool list. It's a nice combination of different things in the list. So he has, I'm just trying to find why it's not only a goblin or only an orc list. So he has the goblin raiders and the goblin king on the Scuttler spider. Otherwise it's a full orc list. So I'm quite eager to see why he wanted to include these couple of goblins. Also, I think currently in the book there's no really incentive to go full orc. I don't know if you get an extra discipline if you go full orc, but there should be. But in the new book, definitely there's going to be some incentives to either go full orc or full goblin. Yeah, so this is the list. I think it's a nice list, and I would love to play against it. We have Kunde with Saurian Ancients. So Saurian Ancients, I don't really know how it works. I think it was in a rules pack stating how it was working, how to treat the fact that you're gonna have to lose your general, because Saurian Ancients doesn't have a general. So I think maybe it's just a character, and then if it is just a character, then I would have included something else besides an Archmage, I think. I mean, there's some stuff in your list that you just need, like a chaff unit. The skin gorillas probably are going to be acting as chaff as well. You can also just take a skin chief and make that one your character that can die. Otherwise, the Kaiman Warriors with Tooth and Claw, I think they're quite a decent choice in the army. Flaming standards are always useful to bring. So yeah, I think it's I don't know if mind shifting mastery is the one where you can cast the attribute of a different lore. I believe so. You can cast the attribute of divination and then also of alchemy. So with the flaming standards, you're gonna get rerolls to wound against the targets that you will target. Then the Tyroscuto heads with the sun catcher crystals. They used to be the strength 6 2x2 catapult things, but I think they changed it. So I have honestly no idea how they do now. So I would be quite interested to see how this would work. One piece of advice is that divination is always it's a double-sided lore. Basically, it makes your troops hit harder, but it also makes your troops stick around longer with minimized discipline. Double minimized discipline is going to be quite tough to shift. So even if you win combat by 5 and he has to test on a 3, if it's rerollable, I think the Tyroscutus has the monolith of vitalism, which means that he's to be a B. So then 3 discipline 3 tests with rollable is still manageable. It's not that likely, but then again, it is still, I think it's like 30% chance or something to pass that test. Then we have Kun S with Warriors of the Dark Gods. So he's bringing all kinds of different toys, most notably a Chosen Lord on a Chimera. a cheaper Chosen Lord who's the general with demonic wings, because why would you not? It's just such a cool model aesthetic, I think. Halberd warriors with envy, they're gonna definitely kill some stuff. And then the rest of the army is also tuned towards envy, with warrior knights of envy. And then a small unit of wretched ones. I haven't really thought about running them 3 big, because I like the reliability of a full block, and I like the point efficiency of just a single one. Maybe with wretched ones, if you just invest the amount of points that you want to, and you just see what's going to happen with the unit, it might just work. So 3 wretched ones might also just do the trick, basically. I think it's a decent collection of different things. You have your fast scoring, you have your combat threats. Obviously, you're missing magic, but then again, if you miss magic, then you have points for other stuff, like a second Chosen Lord. That can also be quite a difficult threat on the table to deal with for your opponent. We have Luke with Warriors of the Dark Gods. So Luke brought a Karkadan. I like the diversity of the different Chosen Lords and the different Warriors lists that we have going around, because no single Warrior list so far has been even similar, I would say. So here once again we have Chosen Lord. Now this one has a Karkadan and also has some Envy Chosen Knights. We have seen a unit of 4 Chosen Knights before, but then the rest of the list was completely different, with a Exalted Herald, if I believe, and well, not much else basically, because then your points are already gone. This one has more smaller pieces. I think scenario-wise it might be a bit better. And then 15 warriors with halberds. I think they're quite a stable choice still. They're big enough to deal with combat threats. They're small enough not to take too much of your army away at 3,500 points. So well done. Lewis is bringing the first dwarf list. So yeah, dwarves. Lewis has been playing dwarves for a long time now. So I think he must have figured out how to play them. Obviously, you need a general. You kind of want a BSB if you don't run any Greybeards. And Dragon Seekers are just good. So yeah, I think this is a golden combination. Handful of Power, I'm not too sure about actually with dwarves. I don't know if the 200 points are worth it, but that's just, you have some combat buffs that you can cast. I don't know if they're worth it with dwarves. Then you have all kinds of different small infantry blocks. I feel like Lewis didn't really want to go for the full strongest army that he could build here, but just for a charismatic small block dwarf army, and I appreciate that. So Kingsguard are still scary in blocks of 15. Forge Wardens have been updated, and they have been improved to have, I believe they have margin shoot and 12-inch range, or they don't, and then they have 18-inch range. But basically they hit on a 2+, and they do a strength 4 AP0 hit, I believe. So they're a bane against Sylvan Elves, basically. So if you have Sylvan Elves, then watch out for these guys. I think it's a nice charismatic list, and I wish him all the best. We have Martin with Dread Elves. It's one of the last Dread Elves around there. A Temple Exarch BSB, Warlock Outcast General. This Warlock Outcast General is an interesting choice. It gives the unit discipline 9 that he is in, because he can use his own discipline. But for commanding presence, he gets -1 on the discipline test. So basically the spears and the auxiliaries, nothing in this army benefits from the additional discipline of his general, other than the unit that the Outcast is in and the unit that the Temple Exarch is in. And that can become a problem, or at least in my Dread Elf lists that I have made since playing with them a bit. I always try to just put in some discipline, fixing things, just to make sure that I don't run into the trouble of my big blocks running away, because it happens. So I'm curious how his experience is going to be. Especially if you, for example, fight fear-causing enemies and your adjudicators go in and then you fail your fear test, you get a -1 to hit. There's still some magic buffs or magic debuffs, and suddenly you're looking at a 5 up to hit with a reroll because of hatred. But then units like these just crumble basically. But well, I mean, if it works, right? So I'm really curious how this is gonna go. Double Hunting Chariot is basically a staple now in Dread Elf lists because they're just so good, cost efficient wise. Thunderpack are good. Everything else in lists, I would just say it's good. However, for the discipline, I would personally want a bit of a different solution. Then we go to Maurice with Infernal Dwarfs. Maurice has, Infernal Dwarfs. So it's a combination of dwarves, it's a combination of goblins, and also some enforcers. These Historic enforcers, they're the cavalry-based size centaur models. So they have resilience 5, which is something that a lot of people don't really notice. With great weapons, I believe that 2 attacks each, so that's if you play them 5 wide, it's going to be 14 attacks. And then likely you have a Vizier with Taurog Ritual. Yeah, the second character in the list. So that one adds another couple of great weapon attacks. This is quite a scary unit for 800 points. With Banner of Speed, it's going to be in your face turn 1. And then, the rest, basically, I don't know how he's going to play it, whether it's going to be a defensive kind of thing where the Taurogs just zone and you try to take profit from your infernal artillery, or if he really wants to push and the rest of the list doesn't really seem like a push list. So I would expect him to play a little bit cautious and then advance slowly and use the Taurog Enforcers basically as his long charge threat. And in that sense, they're going to work quite well. So yeah, I think it could be quite a well thought out list, and I wish him good luck trying to make sure it happens the way that he plans. We have Mick with Undying Dynasties. So Mick usually plays quite model low armies. I think this is not really an exception with double Dreadwings and double big, relatively big units of Tomb Cataphracts. He does not really have any combat characters, but he does have a magic character. Once again, we have a situation where you have a general where, to me personally, it could have been quite easy to make the Nomarch the general. However, Undying Dynasties has the problem that you also want to march with your units. And that can only happen in 12 inches range from your general, so maybe that is why he made the Death Cult Hierarch his general, even though if he has to lose that model in his first game, it's going to be quite a pity for the rest of his list. So the Skeleton Chariots, they're going to always remain quite scary. Banner of the Entombed Skeletons, we've talked about Banner of the Entombed before. Just to remind you, it's just good scoring. And quite effective, and especially with these scenarios as we have, I think it's quite a staple to take. 10 Skeleton Cavalry, I don't really know why you would want them, because they're not that useful, but then again, still the cheap scoring, it's 170 points, so that could also be a reason to take them. Yeah, the Dread Sphinxes, they're just going to be the main powerhouses together with the Tomb Cataphracts. And they can either be quite successful or they can let Mick a little bit down, depending on the matchups, I think. Then we have Nick with Orcs and Goblins. So Nick is bringing just basically a box standard list with just all kinds of different fun things that he found in his cabinet. So he has small units of Cave Goblins, basically for the scoring and the single mad kit that they can bring. A bigger unit of Orcs with a Green Tide banner. I would have put on some equipment there, but then again, if they manage to just do the damage that you need to do, then it's also fine. Big unit of Trolls. This is actually the first unit of Trolls we see, other than the Ascalander Ice Trolls. And then, yeah, basically just the general Orc and Goblin stuff like the Nash Dashers, the Wrecking Team, the Splatter. I think it's, well, it's a list that can definitely do some damage in general matchups. It's a good all-comers list, and well, it's just going to be one of these armies that just move around a bit, angle a bit, try to get some good charges somewhere. And yeah, it's going to be fun to play against this list. We have Paul with Ogre Counts. So, Ogre Counts, what do we have? We have a gun with an Ogre Pistol and an Iron Fist with Heart Ripper. I played against that the other day, and I don't remember what it does. Because you usually see a great gun with the Kagadi's Legacy. So I have just no idea. But I know that Brace of Ogre Pistols, then he can shoot a little bit, and that is fun. Then we have Shaman Wizard Apprentice on Shamanism with Magical Heirloom. So he's gonna have 2 spells. I don't really know if there's any other spells in the list. I don't think so. So that is quite an enthusiastic magic phase. Because then you have basically the Awaken the Beast and your Hereditary, and that's it. It could be worth it. I mean, it's 245 for a Shaman, so that is a minimal investment magic phase for basically -1 to wound on one of your units. It's not even that bad. It's just you're gonna get 1 spell through, and that's it, and that is fine. Tribesmen with the Banner of Discipline, just to make sure that they don't flee. And then otherwise, yeah, the list just has some stuff here and there. The 6 mercenary veterans with Brace of Ogre Pistols are something to look out for, especially since the poison also applies to their shooting. And then, yeah, the rest of the list just is solid. I think this would be a list that I would also be willing to take to a more competitive tournament, just for the sake of it being quite balanced and all the choices in Ogres being quite okay. It's not bad anyway, so I think it's a good list. We have Peter with Highborn Elves. So Highborn Elf lists are also quite interesting to look at generally, because they can go from quite extreme to quite balanced. This time we have a High Prince General. He has a longbow, he's Master of Canray Tower, which used to be a very, very popular honor for Commander BSBs. But then they nerfed it a bit by making it incredibly expensive, I believe. So now you see more High Princes. So the Lightning Vambraces still give an extra pound spell, and this is his magic phase in the end. It's just a decent magic phase. He is the general though, so he's gonna have to lose this guy one of his games. Then we have a commander on a horse with the BSB and some other equipment. Probably he's gonna join a unit, probably the unit of Highborn Lancers. Yeah, so we have basically a big unit of Lancers, small unit of Lancers, some Sea Guard, Line Guard, and then some supporting units. It's basically just a very balanced list, and for that reason it can do very well. Shooting output wise, it could be a bit higher maybe, but then again the Sky Sloops, they also shoot, and they shoot with force 25 shots, which is quite decent in a list that has quite long charge ranges generally. So I think he can play out the long game and just whittle down his opponent, and then go in for the kill at the end. It can work quite well, because all of these pieces can also charge with quite scary charges, quite scary damage on the charge. I think it's a cool, balanced Highborn Elf list. We have the spare player with the Dwarven Olds, so this is going to be probably Lars. And, well, basically, it's either him or his wife choosing the models that he's playing, and it's mostly the rule of cool. So it's like, oh, this model is cool, okay, I'll put it on the table. So that's the right attitude for a spare list. And Yeah, it's a decent spare list, I would say. It's still has a bit of a competitive edge, but it's not using all the tricks in the book. And yeah, it's just a decent list. Is there anything special that stands out? A double Vengeance Seeker can give some problems in some matchups. Um, but then again, that's also one of the things where it still has to have an edge. We have Rick with Empire of Sonsdal. So Rick and I, we often talk about lists, and the Wizard on the Great Griffin with Locket of Osana is one of the pieces in Empire of Sonsdal that I love the most about the army. So I'm really, really pleased to see it back. Then your Knight Commander is just quite cheap, which means that he can still die without crippling the entire army, other than the fact that you lose your parent unit on your cavalry. Inquisitors are quite cost efficient in Empire, so just an Inquisitor paired weapons here is hard. Still has, let me see, 4 attack, strength 5 with D3, multiple wounds, and lethal strike, which is not too shabby against a lot of monsters. And then otherwise, he basically just tries to make full use of the parent support system with parent unit, electoral cavalry with the Knight Commander in there, with the Imperial Guard, and then support units in the form of handgunners, heavy infantry, and then 1 unit of Knights of the Sun Griffin with the Banner of Discipline. It's a decent, balanced army with some shooting, with some magic. Even though the magic is quite limited to the quite expandable Great Griffin Wizard. And then Cannon and Mortar is just a stable setup for Empire. So I think it can do very well against the right opponents. It can also draw very well. So it will give matchups where everything is gonna die from both sides of the table. But then again, it's anyway going to be interesting, challenging games, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We have Rico with Orcs and Goblins. So Rico has Edbasher, the Feral Orcs. He has a mix of Orcs and Goblins. Once again, we see the combination of Feral Orc, Orcs, and Wrecking Teams. So my personal quest in fighting against Orcs and Goblins is to just make your opponent's Feral Orcs land on their own Wrecking Teams. If you can manage that, then you win the tournament, with regards to my opinion. So try it, please, as opponents of Rico, and then if you manage, report back to me. Otherwise, it's a nicely balanced out list with just a couple of blocks of Orcs, some small stuff around it, and then some magic to support it. The general in this case is an Orc Shaman. Could have been an Orc Chief, but he's already the BSB. Could have been a Goblin Chief, but they are basically just cowboys on cave gnashes. So yeah, the Orc Shaman it is. I think he has Discipline 8. That could also be a way to tackle this army. But it's a nice mix of little units, and I think it's going to be quite a blast to play with and against. Robin is also bringing Orcs and Goblins. There's so many Orcs and Goblins at this event. I think this is one of the lists that was partially mounted. So yeah, we have 2 units of 10 mounted at Basher Feral Orcs. They are a risk to play with, I would say, because they can charge quite far. They have low agility, so basically they don't really always want to charge. But then again, they have Frenzied, and the list does have a BSB, but it only has Discipline 8, I think. So that's going to be quite interesting. It could be, it's really matchup dependent, basically. So either your opponent has Agility 4, I think you need to strike first, and sufficient damage output to put quite a big dent in the head bashers, or it doesn't, and then, well, you're just going to run over the enemy army. So, I mean, fluff-wise, it's a really cool army. It might lead to a bit less interesting matchups, but then again, you also will have some movement tools to counter Feral Orcs quite nicely. So, It's if you play against the right opponents, it's gonna be it's anyway gonna be interesting games, because if you play against opponents that know what it does and know how to react to it, they're gonna have an interesting game because they can solve um, a puzzle of risk basically, where you have to balance out the risks that you are taking against the chances that your opponent will fail his frenzy test. And if you play against opponents that are just there for an easy game, then it's also going to be an enjoyable game because you're just going to roll some dice, see some mounted out bashers either die or kill, and then it's going to be fun anyway. So yeah, it's a cool list, and I would like to play against it because it's going to be fun. We have Robin V with Dwarvenholds, so this time we have a collection of different blocks of dwarves. We have Greybeards, Clan Warriors, some Seekers, not even that many. We have some Deep Watch, we have Rangers. I think the fluff of Rangers are really, really cool. So one trick that you can pull with Rangers is that you put in a Thane with the Rune of Returning and Rune of Lightning. I don't think he's doing that here, because then he also needs the Rune of Kinship to scout with them, I believe. But my Dwarven knowledge is a bit dated, so I don't really know for sure. You see competitively that dwarves like this are run with just minimum size units of dwarf warriors, max copters, and then a gun line basically. Here the gunline elements in the dwarf catapults, and basically only other shooting is going to be the rangers and the throwing weapons on the greybeards. So the catapults are not really that well protected from enemy threats, as long as the opponent can pass the rest of the dwarves. This list might have a little bit of a problem with getting scoring units in the enemy's deployment zone. But then again, if that is the only scenario that you're struggling with, then you don't really have to mind, because the other scenarios are going to be a bit more easy. Like you are going to be able to keep one of your scoring units alive, quite likely. You're going to be able to just go to 1 point on the table and score that, because you're still playing with dwarves. So it's still going to be quite manageable to make most of the objectives. I think it's a decent list to bring to the event, and I wish you all the best. We also have Rule with Ogre Khans. So Rule is also not even bringing Kakadai's Legacy. He's bringing a Great Khan with Destiny's Call, paired weapons, Rampages, Chain. I believe that gives you grind attacks or extra stomp attacks or something. And some other stuff. And then we have 2 Shamans. We have a Khan BSB. And then basically just the rest of the list. So the Tribesman with Iron Fist, with Banner of Speed, Speed 7, March 14. That's going to be quite speedy against a lot of the infantry armies that we've seen. Tusker Cavalry also with a Banner of Speed. I don't know if they go to Speed 8 or Speed 9 then, but that is quite speedy indeed. And a Frost Mammoth. Frost Mammoth is quite cool in general, because then your own army generally gets to strike first. Now the question is obviously if the ogres are going to be striking at enough damage potential to really make a difference, or if it's going to be quite tricky to make them do enough damage. So for that you would need magic support, I would say. Wizard Adept Pyromancy to make yourself or to give yourself +1 to wound. Wizard Adept Shamanism to give yourself +1 strength. And you're looking at Strength 5 ogres effectively striking first with all of their attacks. That could become quite nasty. It's quite an easy maneuverable army, in the sense that you deploy your I think it's going to be like this, where you deploy your 2 blocks of tribesmen with your characters in there. You have your Tusker Cavalry on one flank, you have your Frost Mammoth maybe on the other or behind the tribesmen, and then you just advance and try to strike first and try to strike hard. And then it's quite an easy game plan, so that's going to be quite nice to see on the table. We have Stefan with Highborn Elves. So once again, this could be a totally different list from the other highborn elves. We see that the High Prince that he has is once again a Master of the Canray Tower one, so that is quite similar to the other one. We still have a Commander BSB, this one is on foot, however. With High Warden of the Flame, that is something you don't really see that often. I think it's a really cool honor, because basically a BSB to me should be like a Flame Warden. I think it's a really iconic sight for some reason. I don't know why, but I think so. And then the rest of the list basically is kind of passive in the sense that you have some Sea Guard blinking away some wounds every turn. You have 3 Sea Guard Reapers, that is quite hefty at this point level. And then magic wise, well, you do have the High Prince with the Master of Canray Tower, and in addition you have an Initiate of the Fiery Heart, which is basically a Dragon Mage. It used to be a Dragon Mage, came out of character points, and now it's just a bit less armored special choice. Yeah, it's the general archetype of Highborn Elves, where they play a little bit gunliney. Yeah, if you manage to go through, then then you will go through, and if you don't, well, then you get shot by the Sea Guard Reapers. Yeah, so objective-wise, I don't think it can score that well, because you still have to move to the objectives. It could be okay, but I just don't know that well. 19 Flame Wardens are still quite scary at these point levels. So as an opponent, I would try to prioritize maybe just on killing the combat blocks, and just let the Sea Guard Reapers shoot, blink off some wounds. If you're fast enough, they don't really do that much. We have ties with Makar. It's the other supplement army that we were looking at. So Makar, I don't know that much about. I know that a Gyula is a general kind of upgrade. I think you can either make a male or a female version, basically. The female is the Gyula, I thought, and then it boosts your units a bit more. But I could be just spewing out some nonsense here. Taltos is the Wizard Master on the Wasteland Behemoth. That is quite a big beast at these points. But then again, everybody is putting down scary stuff. The Makar Lancers with the Lamellar Barding. I believe they can fight in 3 ranks with that. But then again, there's still only 9 of them. So I don't really understand Makar, I think. Probably it's going to be quite interesting to play, but I don't think anyone knows what all this stuff does, other than to shoot away a little bit, charge away a little bit. I believe that the last times that I played Makar, I was not even that impressed by their damage output on the charge. But then again, I usually play Warriors of the Dark Gods that either strikes first or survives. Then Dread Elves that strike first and they kill them. Empire doesn't really care about you charging in with like 9 guys, generally, unless they're Nitrous Resplendent or something else, like Wild Huntsman or something. And Vampires, well, they also don't really care. So maybe not the good reference to go for here. Just like balance-wise, I think it's a nice army, because it has a bit of the combat stuff, a bit of the iconic stuff of the Makar. I think you have to include the Step Mammoth, because it's just such an iconic piece in the army. And yeah, I mean, still a Wasteland Behemoth, a Step Mammoth, and a Nomadic Giant. That's still 3 rather scary gigantic models that your opponent has to deal with. So I would be very interested to play against this, just to learn the rules of Makar a bit better. And I would be curious to see what's going to be happening. We have Ton with Dwarvenholds. So Ton is bringing double Dragon Seeker and double Seeker units. Seeing the size of the Seekers, I think one of the Dragon Seekers is going to go into either of the units each. Dragon Seekers are always scary, especially because you just have to beat them in combat, especially if they're in units. Then it's like, okay, they are in a unit, I'm gonna have to kill the entire unit. Then I still have a Dragon Seeker left that I have to allocate attacks to. So basically, the best answer to Seekers is to not engage them or to shoot them down. So good luck with that. They don't have Vanguard though, so that is going to be a bit easier for Ton's opponents. I think it's also nice that he didn't give them Vanguard, because you can also build this archetype dwarf list with 3 units of Vanguard, like 2 Seeker units and 1 Greybeard unit or something, and then your opponent's just standing there like, oh wow, this is the trick that you do. Okay, let's see what we make of this battle. Otherwise, he has a bit more of the MSU style. I think, well, generally I would frown a little bit upon making the archetype of full gun line with just MSU dwarves in front of it and gyrocopters and grudge busters and basically the most competitive stuff that you can find. In this case, I think it's toned down quite a bit with no grudge busters, no steam copters, barely any artillery, and even the organ gun, it's not rune crafted. So I think it's toned down to manageable levels. And anyway, also people should be able to play lists that they like to play. So it's always a bit of a balance between what do you want your opponent to be able to play and what do you want to play yourself. So power level is always something interesting to talk about. So Ton, I think you did a good job on bringing this list, and I think it's a cool list. I'm curious if you're gonna manage all of the objectives, because basically you have a list that could do so. And I wish you all the best for the event. We also have Vincent with Demon Legions. I believe this is the last list. Yes, it is. So Vincent is bringing demons. We don't have any greater demon at the event because he's only bringing Harbingers. So he has 1 general, he has 1 non-general. So secretly in the list there's still quite a lot of magic because you have the Wizard Adept Harbingers. So 2 of them. You still have the Eidolon Champion, who's also a wizard. So in the end you have a bit more magic than people might suspect. Bloodflies are still quite something to deal with as an opponent. Clawed Fiends can really go to a high damage potential, such can the Succubi and the Myrmidons. Divining Snout is an item that I always miss when I'm setting up for my opponent's counter charges, because it gives you 2 extra inches on your charge if the opposing unit has some type of magic item in the unit, I believe. So that ramps up your charge ranges quite quickly. Otherwise, well, the Eidolons with Aura of Despair have accurate, so that is quite scary because they shoot quite hard. They shoot at a 4+2 hit then on range, 18-inch range, and if you try to make your armor saves and you roll a 1, 2, 3, or 4, then you automatically fail. So basically, if this list comes up against the Empire of Sunstyle of Harm, then Harm is going to have quite a difficult time, I think. Because of the Piercing Spike of the Clawed Fiends, the Bloodflies, the Eidolons. Yeah, that's going to be quite tough. So I would like to see that matchup and see what's going to happen there. Yeah, with that, we went through all of the lists for the event. Yeah, so we are missing some lists. Would have been fun to see some Kingdom of Aquitaine and some Vermin Swarm, most notably. There's a lot of Orcs and Goblins, so it's quite likely that Orcs and Goblins will win the event. But then again, with these wacky scenarios, it's not very easy to predict who's going to do well at the event and who's going to struggle a bit more. Personally, if I had to take a favorite, I nearly always try to do this. Well, I mean, if you have a character more than 500 points, then you're gonna lose out on max points for your first battle. That's just basically that's what's gonna happen. So basically you're looking for a list with not too expensive of a general. You're still looking for a list that can score the objective of going into the enemy deployment. So it has to be a little bit on the aggressive side, or at least possible. Or it has to have some kind of discount units that you can just fling around and then score with those. Basically, Orcs and Goblins is quite well tuned for that. So in that sense, I think... I mean, Rico doesn't even have too bad of a list for this. He has all the elements in his list to make it all work. So I'm just gonna nominate him as my favorite pick for this event. Yeah, I'm just gonna go for him. So Rico, no pressure, but you're gonna win the event. And with that, I would like to thank you for watching, and I will see you at the event next time, and hope that you will have awesome battles. See you the next time.